We might have trouble getting pregnant, which is something that some of us already have problems with here on Earth. And then it's not clear that women's bodies can handle labor in 40% gravity. I'm Kelly Weinersmith. I'm adjunct in the biosciences department at Rice University, and I'm co-author of A City on Mars.
I'm Zach Weinersmith. I'm unqualified. I draw cartoons and things, and I'm.
You have a third of a physics degree.
I have 3/8 of a physics degree,
Oh.
so I do have a little science background. So
Yeah.
I think that's enough. That's more than enough. And this is great. So you've written a book called City on Mars, and Trump has recently said he's looking to plant a flag on Mars, and Elon Musk has said there's going to be 1 million of us living on Mars. So this is all a positive set of stuff coming together. Tell me about your vision for this city on Mars. Should I be planning for my place in this city on Mars?
How about you start?
yeah, all right. Well, so there's a couple things there. So first of all, it's maybe a little dangerous to try to parse exactly what was meant in a speech by the sitting president. But manifest destiny, for anyone who doesn't know, refers to a concept that goes back to the 1840s, and you can debate exactly the length and breadth of it, and whether like an average white settler in 1850 was actually thinking about the philosophy of what they were doing. But the essential idea is that for Americans, there is a sort of responsibility and a destiny to conquer westward and seize all that land for us. And so it was a bit ominous to hear it referred to in the context of space, which is legally a commons. It, if you like, belongs to all of us or none of us. It kind of makes no difference. So it would be as if someone said, by the way, it'd be totally cool for the U.S. to plant a flag and claim a chunk of Antarctica. It's on that level in terms of legality. So legally, I wouldn't start planning. And then maybe we can get into the kind of scientific feasibility, which is also rather questionable.
Yeah, I think so. So let's say that we're not concerned about the legality, and we have, as well as this, the world's richest man planning to put his resources towards this. This is a marvelous scientific and engineering exploration, and we should look forward to our life on the red planet, surely.
Yes.
No, so I would disagree. So we don't actually have a lot of good data on how human bodies fare in space. Most of what we know comes from people on space stations in orbit around Earth. And they're in free fall experiencing something like zero gravity. And we know that that's very bad for their bones and their muscles. It also looks like it's bad for their eyes because fluid shifts up and creates pressure on the eyes and changes the shape of your eyes, which messes with your vision. And we don't know if the 40% of Earth's gravity that you find on Mars is going to make those problems go away or just make them less intense. But now if you're looking at a lifetime instead of a year, lifetimes instead of a year, it's not clear that the human body can even survive in this environment it wasn't adapted for. Also, Earth and the space stations orbiting it are protected by a planet-wide magnetosphere, which protects us from space radiation, which is intense and different than the kinds of radiations we encounter here on Earth. But Mars doesn't have that kind of protection, so you're going to be exposed to that radiation. We don't know how bad that's going to be, but it's reasonable to assume that there'll be increased cancer rates. So the proposals that we've seen for life on Mars include burying your habitat under meters of this toxic dirt that you find on the surface of Mars to protect yourself from radiation. And all of these problems, we don't know how they're going to interplay with having babies. Can women survive labor? We don't know. Can babies survive birth? We don't know. There's a lot of medical problems to worry about.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get on to the babies in a bit, but let's sort of start more at the beginning. So the first thing we need to do is get a spaceship there. How long is that going to be, and what are the hazards I'm going to experience just in the space journey?
Yeah, so how long it's going to be is a tough question. And I would say the main reason it's tough is because there's really only one vehicle being built right now for the purpose, which is SpaceX's Starship. It's really cool. SpaceX has a reputation for producing miracles, so I wouldn't bet against them. But it could be the next launch window in 2 years. It could be 4 years, 6 years. Who knows? But let's say plausibly in 4 or 6 years they could launch it. The worries you would have en route. So one, as Kelly mentioned, you're not experiencing gravity unless you have the ship on some kind of spinning tether system, which, produces its own frightening bits. You don't want to be slung off into space if something goes wrong. You also are exposed to all the radiation of space. The only people who have experienced that before are the 24 guys who went to the moon. They seem to be all right, but of course they were only out there for like a week and a half. Mars trip is going to be 6 months. That's just inbound. They're going to be experiencing that chronic radiation, but they have a risk of acute radiation because the sun now and then fires out these proton blasts, charged ion blasts, and so if you're in the beam, if you like, you could get acute radiation sickness and get very sick or die in what I would say is one of the worst ways I can imagine dying, which is all these different tissues in your body just not working anymore. There's you got to imagine like the old time polar exploration missions. Little things could go wrong, right? If your food spoils, it's not like you have a way to get more food. There's no way to send it to you. There's no way to get it on site. If you have a problem with oxygen, on Space Station Mir at one point, they tried to set up an oxygen canister and it caught fire. And they were lucky to survive. So there's all sorts of little stuff that could go wrong. But then the other thing to realize, and this can be underrated in the public consciousness, like if you told me in 4 years SpaceX fired some astronauts around Mars to orbit and come home, I could believe that. It would be risky. It'd be, maybe like 50-50 chance of survival, depending on the specifics, but it could be done. Landing on Mars is actually quite hard because on Earth, when you want to land, you get to swim through a thick atmosphere. They don't have that on Mars. It's almost vacuum. It's 1% Earth atmosphere. That's why these rovers have to like lower down on a crane. And humans with all their like food and water and underpants are going to weigh a lot more. So I guess that would be my initial top risk for just getting there.
Okay, but we've ignored like party poopers like you who want to
yes,
our fun. And we've got there, and Elon Musk has once again owned the libs and shown you guys that this sort of is totally achievable, and you just need to believe in America more. And then, so we're going to set up our city on there. Now, I'm sad that I'm not going to be seeing lots of Martian sunsets. I'm going to be living underground like a mole. But tell me about my mole lifestyle. What will I eat? What will I do? What will I still need to get from Earth?
Well, so you're probably going to want to bring a lot of shelf-stable foods with you initially, because we're going to need to figure out a lot about growing plants on the red planet. One of the problems we're going to have is that the dirt on the surface of Mars is laden with perchlorates. So these are endocrine-disrupting chemicals that mess with the hormones produced by your thyroid. And so this messes with things like blood pressure and heart rate. And if you are a fetus that's developing, it messes with nervous system development. And this stuff is water soluble, so you can get it out of the soil, but you're going to have to be super careful that you actually do that. And if you can figure that out, then we can start growing plants in that soil. There's some reason to believe it will still be difficult because that soil is super jagged and also kind of clingy. So you're going to need to be extra careful to make sure people don't breathe it in. There's some concern about stone grinders disease, which is a disease when you get lots of tiny little sharp things in your lungs that scar it over and over again, making it hard to breathe. So we're going to try to keep this stuff under control. Yes. If you do figure out how to grow plants in it, that's great. You're probably going to spend a lot of your day working on that. The different simulations that we've had for life in a sort of enclosed bubble where you need to grow all of your own food and modulate your atmosphere sorry about almost smacking you in the face, have involved something like 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week of working on like just growing food. So essentially like subsistence farming. And our plan for protein is not super exciting unless you're a vegan or a vegetarian. You're probably not going to be able to bring chickens or cows with you. They make a mess. They're not very efficient at converting the plants that you give them into protein. So most of the proposals that we've seen involve things like mealworms for protein, which some cultures are okay with. It's not super appealing to me, but the great thing about insects is that the parts of the plant that we don't eat, you can feed to them, and now you've turned waste into protein. So the menu on Mars leaves a bit to be desired, in my opinion.
Yes.
Okay, but so this is you've convinced me that this is moderately unpleasant. But if we return to Manifest Destiny, surely the argument is we need all of humanity's eggs to not be in one basket. So we need to set this up, and then once we've got ourselves a nice self-sufficient colony, that's a sort of point against our extinction.
Yeah, and so we are totally willing to say, in principle, that argument is true. The math seems to check out. 2 is more than 1. But so just a couple things. So one, if you're talking about not just a city, but a self-sufficient city, something that does not exist even on Earth, where like air is free, and there's McDonald's. Setting up a self-sufficient city is enormously difficult. We don't really know how to do it. If you think about countries that are somewhat self-sufficient by force, like Cuba or North Korea, they're not always the nicest places to live, and they still do trade. They're not living down a hole above a vacuum made of poison. And so, let me just give one example of why this might be more difficult than you're imagining, or two quick ones. Okay, so like, we talked to an engineer, like, well, we were trying to think about how much battery backup you would want to bring on Mars. How would we calculate this? And he says, it's basically impossible to calculate because you start to think about all the services Earth provides. Like the cheapest way to ship tomatoes from South America to America or North America or Europe is by boat. It's so much more energy and money efficient to go by boat. You have a free lane between every coastal city. You don't have that on Mars, right? All shipping is going to have to happen by more conventional means. So like, imagine problems like that in every single direction. It's going to be really difficult. What was it?
I think the computer chips is a bit.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So the Earth can just barely create these like computer chips that are suddenly so important. These 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer chips, right? We like it takes like the entire planet. Like companies in Europe are building these lithography techniques that nobody else can do. A lot of the design happens in the U.S. and there are these new fabs opening up. And it's like famously TSMC in Taiwan has these like extremely special facilities. You try to imagine building these on Mars. It's not just that it's going to be difficult. It's not just that it requires a huge amount of water, which, by the way, is rather difficult to get on Mars. It's also that why would you bother? Because you can ship in, as long as Earth exists, 150-ton Starship is going to bring all the chips you need. So why would you ever even bother to become what's called autarkic, which means, self-sufficient economically? So there's no economic incentive to do it. There's no and it's not an easy path forward. It's not obvious why you would do this. So when we say don't put all your eggs in one basket, like it's a much bigger problem than it appears. And then lastly, we should note that it's not obviously existentially great to have two civilizations in the same solar systems that might fight with each other. Part of why we don't use nuclear weapons part of why we seldom use gas or biological weapons on this planet is because we might hurt each other and ourselves, right? So if you throw a nuclear weapon, if you test a nuclear weapon on the surface of the Earth, you're putting these nasty ions, you're putting strontium-90 into the atmosphere, and it hurts your own children. If you do it to another planet down a gravity well, it doesn't. There's no risk of direct blowback. So the wheels are off on part of what prevents us from using these weapons.
And I think in the near term, a bigger concern is that if we do start having a scramble for space, that could create increased geopolitical tensions between nuclear wielding superpowers here on Earth, which could be bad for the rest of us as well.
Yeah. So let's say that again, we've completely ignored you and we've set this up and we've found people who are prepared to do all of this, take these risks, live this horrible lifestyle. Now they need to have sex. Yeah. Kelly, tell me what happens. Yeah. Not the sort of complete ins and outs, but what are your worries?
What level of detail are you?
Yeah, so there's some gravity on Mars, which is going to take care of some of the mechanical problems that you might have en route. So if you don't have artificial gravity, when you get a force in one direction, it could push your partner against the wall and, the opposite wall, which would be less than romantic, I think.
Yeah, Newton knew about these things, yeah.
Yes, he did, right. But, more concerning to, I imagine that humans are going to solve what I think of as the docking problem. We're very clever. We'll find a way to solve that. More concerning is, can we get pregnant in space? There's some evidence that decidualization, which is the process where an embryo or where the uterus prepares for embryo implantation, that requires some amount of gravity. And it's not clear that Martian gravity is going to be the right gravity, so we might have trouble getting pregnant, which is something that some of us already have problems with here on Earth. And then it's not clear that women's bodies can handle labor in 40% gravity. For example, astronauts on the International Space Station lose 1% of the density of their hip bones every month. And if that goes down to 1% on Mars, how strong are your hip bones going to be when it comes time for labor to kick in? I wouldn't want to be the first woman hoping that my hips hold out when labor starts. Additionally, rodents that we've sent to space have needed to do twice as many of certain kinds of contractions, presumably because their muscles are just not as strong when they're exposed to lower gravity. And anyone who's been through labor knows you don't want that to last twice as long, that's for sure. And so we don't know how safe this is going to be. Additionally, you're far away from all of the medical care that we rely on, so you might expect there to be more death from hemorrhaging. We don't know that fetuses can develop in 40% gravity, so there's lots of reasons to be concerned that reproduction either can't happen in space, or a lot of people are going to die while reproduction is happening in space. And we just don't have a lot of research to understand how big of a risk it is. So we could do things like set up a research station on the moon where you're exposed to the same amount of radiation, essentially, and even less gravity than you have on Mars. So if stuff works okay on the moon, it'll probably be okay on Mars. And if it looks like it's not going well on the moon, you can get people home really quick. But we just don't have good data on how risky this stuff is.
Yeah. So I sense a certain negativity. Is this going to happen? Do you think we're going to see at least humans landing on Mars in your lifetime, even if they don't stay there and have sex?
That's a really tough question. I mean, so, one thing that becomes very clear when you do, as we did, reading old books predicting the future of space is, people have tended since the early 70s to overestimate the future. And part of that was that they thought the space shuttle was going to solve all problems. And, while we think Starship is a much more sensible proposal than the shuttle ever was, it is really dangerous, talk about putting all your eggs in one basket, to hope that the future goes a certain way because of one vehicle. If Starship doesn't work out, that really sets back the timetable. If it does work out, if you told me that in 20 years there are boots on Mars, I wouldn't be blown away. It certainly seems possible. It's going to be insanely expensive. There's no good economic case for it. But as you said, the richest guy on Earth, maybe 20 years he'll be the richest person in history, really seems to want to. So that's probably enough reason to get it done.
And geopolitical prestige of being the first nation to get there might drive us forward also. So it depends on a lot of factors that are really hard to predict.
It's path dependent. Like you can think like the space race, the initial space race in the 60s didn't have to happen. It's really, if you read through the history, it's like a series of coincidences that result in two nations being willing to shell out an insane, absolutely bonkers amount of money to do something that's like scientifically, arguably kind of pointless, and certainly economically pointless. So people can yell at me,
but Tom, you seem like you really want to go.
Yeah.
So are you gonna sign up to be one of the first ones to go to Mars?
Own the libs on Mars?
Yeah.